Hello, everybody. Today on the Abundant Wellness Podcast, we have Miss Leanne Vogel, or Mrs. Leanne Vogel, I should say, who is a certified holistic nutritionist and functional blood chemistry specialist. She is the founder of the Healthful Pursuit podcast, which was formerly the Keto Diet podcast. She has written several amazing books and serves women all over the world and is a friend of mine. So I am super excited to have you on, Leanne. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be with us.
Oh, Andrea, thanks for having me on.
Anytime, anytime. I'm actually really, really excited for this conversation because I think it's going to answer some questions I have had about keto. I think it's going to help me to maybe like reconcile some experiences I've had personally with
Mm,
keto and intermittent fasting, but mainly because we both work with women with a lot of chronic health issues. And I think that one of the things that I hear the most often is I've either done keto and intermittent fasting and it hasn't helped me, or I don't know like when to use it, how to use it, and like in what instances would it be beneficial. And so I think there's a lot of different ways we could go with this conversation, but why don't we start out with you sharing kind of where your journey with keto began, and then we'll just kind of peel back the layers from there. Does that sound okay?
yeah, you bet. So totally sounds like a great plan. Um, I found keto in 2014 after struggling through amenorrhea, which is a lack of period. And I had been diagnosed with amenorrhea about 7 years before that due to a bunch of different factors, including being on hormonal birth control, having an eating disorder, aka not eating enough, and working out too much. And so I found keto and I was like, it's like the only thing I haven't done. So I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. And after a year, I got my period back and my hormones were back online. And every specialist that I had been to said, you're never going to menstruate. You're never going to ovulate. If you want to have babies, you're going to have to go on a bunch of fake stuff to make it happen because this ain't going to happen on its own.
Yeah.
And so keto changed everything. Even without even planning on it, I got off my ADD medications. So I'm a year in, off my medications for ADD. I'm getting a period. I'm ovulating. And that was really when I realized like I need to share the keto stuff with individuals. Now, because I came from a disordered eating realm, initially my ketogenic diet was really like, if I eat less, I'll generate more ketones and therefore it will help me. And I think
Mm,
that's why it took so long for the keto. I say so long, a year. I think I could have gotten my period back much quicker had
sure.
I just eaten enough on my ketogenic diet.
Right.
And so a lot of my education around keto has been since that time, like you got to make sure you're eating enough on your ketogenic diet. And I think that's where fasting thrives. If you're an individual, specifically a woman, probably listening to the show, who's eating enough, fasting is probably going to be great. And we can go into the intricacies of like why, how, when not to, why you probably didn't experience great things, all of that stuff. Um, but if you're not eating enough, fasting is not for you.
Right.
Period. End of story. Drop the mic, close the door. Like
Yep.
so
Yep.
that was a big issue that I had with fasting, and probably many of the issues that I had personally with fasting is I wasn't eating enough, and then I was fasting on top of that. Like we all intermittent fast every day, multiple times a day between your meals. 3 hours without eating, hey, that's a fast.
Right.
And overnight, that's fasting. And so
Right.
we do have periods of not eating, and that's healthy for us. But then we need to determine what's the goal behind our fasting? What's the goal of our ketogenic diet? Do we need to be all the way keto? Is that necessary? For me now, where I'm at personally in my life on this day of 2024, keto is not necessary. Is fasting necessary? Yes, I still use it as a tool. Coming from an individual who is now eating enough and in many cases in a surplus. So that's a little bit about me and the ketogenic diet and kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm actually remembering there's a part in one of the keto diet books. I'm trying to remember which one, which cookbook it is. I think because you have two, right?
I have I have three
Three.
paperback books.
Okay.
and 2 of them are cookbooks.
Okay, so one of the cookbooks, and this is why, and we'll get into the nuances and like the nitty-gritty, and I'll share a little bit about what helps me to decide if a client may or may not be ready to do something like that, because there's a lot of factors to consider within it. But one of the things that I
Mhm.
loved was that you actually helped identify when it's time to add in carbs and how you know if you need them, and to not be afraid of potatoes, and like think like you were addressing the mindset too, because I was watching all these people do keto and they were literally living off of like bacon and avocado and fake keto foods like from the store,
Mhm.
and I'm like, that doesn't, like, that's not going to serve me in the long run. And come to find out, I'd had some underlying low gallbladder function, and so keto ended up not being awesome for me because I wasn't digesting fats well. So when we're in that space of how to decide, like if somebody's a good fit for keto, one of my first questions is, how is your digestion? Because if I immediately can identify that they have low stomach acid, that they are not digesting food, they have a ton of gas, bloating, and we're assuming that it's not like a food allergy issue, right? But like truly, like there's some malfunction in the digestive tract and they've got a funky gallbladder. I'm like, no, 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 we got to work on all of that stuff first, because it's creating a truckload of inflammation. So for me, that's one of the ways that I can tell, having learned it the hard way myself, because I ended up creating
Always.
gallbladder issues because I was eating way too much fat and protein that my body just couldn't digest because my digestive system was a mess. So, and this is where it's hard as the consumer, because we so want, like, we all want to go on
Mhm.
Instagram and watch an 8-second reel and be like, that is the thing for me. And I know it because how do I know it? There's, you know what I mean? Like, how do we know it? But really, we're so much more complicated than that. So, when it comes to you, what are some of the things that you look for as a practitioner when you're talking with somebody about their goals? And let's say one of their goals is losing inflammation and weight loss, right? Those are two of the biggest ones I hear. Like, I know I need to lose weight. I'm in perimenopause. That's another topic within there, but those are like the two big ones. And they're wanting to lose inflammation. And so they feel like that may be the only way to go about it.
Yeah, so here's the thing that I've learned over time. You're only as good in your diet as the one that you can be really consistent with. So, like, I truly believe that you can reduce your inflammation and lose weight, whether you're eating carbs or not.
Yeah.
So, if you feel like you cannot be consistent with a ketogenic diet and every Friday, Saturday, Sunday you're going out and eating carbs, like, don't do it.
Hmm.
Like, just don't do it, because it's just not going to work for you. Whatever you can be consistent with is the thing that you should be doing. So that's like the big thing that
Right.
I notice time and time again with my clients. So there also has to be like an ease, right? If my client has a ton of different health issues and I truly feel like they should not be keto, I will say, I really don't think now is the time to be keto. A big one that is in addition to the ones that you shared is like, if the individual is not eating enough, I know that the ketogenic diet is going to encourage them to eat less, and that's
Hmm.
not going to help our goal of eating more.
Right.
And so sometimes it's a matter of, okay, well, why don't we spend 3 months getting you to maintenance calories and kind of see how you feel with that and improve your digestion, improve hydrochloric acid creation and bile function, all those things that are required in order to do any sort of eating style well. But especially when it comes to the liver function, your liver is so needed with the ketogenic diet that
Hmm.
if you've had your gallbladder taken out, or you just have sludgy bile, which most people do, or you have a high steatocrit on a GI test that you did, probably now is not the time. Another
Right.
sign that I look for where the ketogenic diet might not be like super fun for you has to do with toxicity. And if I
Hmm.
look back at my first year on keto, when I was all about the ketones, fasting a whole bunch, and I had keto flu for a literal 365 days, that was a detox reaction. Like,
Wow.
my cells were pumping out the fat to burn the fat. And because toxins are stored in fat cells, as you're burning that fat and
You're
using it
releasing the
as energy, you
toxins.
are just releasing all of the things. And I firmly believe that is keto flu. I think that the hair loss we experience on the ketogenic diet is the detoxification. And so if somebody is just a toxic soup, I'm probably going to recommend that we get going with a good amount of drainage opening and detoxification, like pathway work,
Totally.
nutrient supports, binders, and then start with the ketogenic diet. Because I think keto, not only is it great for the metabolic flexibility, but also the detoxification process is incredible. But if I feel like a client is not ready for the ketogenic diet, we think that we could do some form of fasting, and we feel like that's not going to stress out their body and they're not adrenal imbalanced a whole bunch. We might bring in fasting in some capacity, depending on a whole bunch of factors. But just because you're not doing keto doesn't mean that you can't get the benefits of a fasting regimen, or that you can't get the benefits of no keto, no fasting, and you're doing more of a moderate carbohydrate process. So the consistency is key. And if you feel like you can't be consistent, then it's not gonna work for you. And so just like
Right.
playing that game of like, no, but I'll like try. And 4 days later it's not working. And then you try and 4 days later it's not working. Like we need to reassess what
Right.
you're doing.
Exactly. Yes, and that's so good. And you touched on something kind of in more in the realm of fasting, I think, but one of the reasons why when somebody's asking me like, I'm in perimenopause, I'm using that example because I think we're getting a lot more clients at in that age range, 35 to 45, that have a heavy toxic burden. Their body is not functioning the way that it should. It's harder to lose weight than it used to be. And so they are thinking now like, oh, these are like my only two options now, right? When really we do
Yeah.
need to like go upstream and let's figure out some of the upstream problems to why maybe that's happening. But one of the biggest reasons I will personally not recommend like even intermittent fasting more than like a 13-hour window, because most of us are not eating, from like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., like ideally, is blood sugar imbalances and adrenal issues. So if there's like the
Yeah.
wacky cortisol and your blood sugar is all over the place, can you talk a little bit about why that may not be beneficial to do something like intermittent fasting? I have my thoughts on it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So if your blood sugar is all over the place, we need to understand that let's say this individual is eating like pretty good and their glucose is like wonky. Like maybe you're wearing a CGM and it's like up, down, up, and you're waking up and it's high and you're like, what is going on? Elevated glucose is a sign of inflammation, infection, stress. So if we're then gonna throw in fasting into the mix or a ketogenic diet into the mix, that's only going to perpetuate the issue. And we have to understand too, from a hormonal perspective, when cortisol is elevated, when there's anything that's stressing you out, your progesterone will drop. And in the case of perimenopausal individuals,
It's already
like
low.
we're already
Yes.
dropping like our progesterone is dropping. We
Right.
don't
Yeah.
need to
We don't need help.
we don't need
Yeah.
help with that. Like we're good.
We're good.
So in that case, I don't love bringing in fasting, but I will say that if your insulin, in addition to your, let's say your glucose is like always elevated, it's not so much high, low, but it's just like elevated and your insulin is high, then fasting or a ketogenic diet or even lowering your carbohydrates could be helpful. Um, but those are kind of two instances where, yeah, I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and yeah, because one of the things that I have seen personally for myself, but also with clients, is that their goal is like, I have to lose weight, but they're still very much attached to the diet culture mentality, which is that I just have to push through and I have to starve myself and this has to be really difficult and I have to do it perfectly. And
Mm.
so that creates this situation where something like they're not paying attention to how they actually feel on intermittent fasting. Like I had there's a lady that I was working with that she's like, "Gosh, I just can't keep my eyes open." It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm thinking, well, did you eat anything today? And she's like, no, I'm doing intermittent fasting. And I'm like, girlfriend, like, brain function, if you can't focus, if you can't pay attention, that is a sign that you need food. It doesn't mean you need to just push through it, especially if you're like 3 weeks in, you know? We should be beyond any like weird side effects by that point.
Well, and I think too, it's like she was probably intermittent fasting every day
Yeah.
because like we can't just like find something and use it sometimes. We're like, okay, I found fasting. Now I'm going to do it every single day. I don't eat until 4 p.m.
Mhm.
No, I like it can be a tool, and we can even talk about why within the cycle it's helpful to do fasting sometimes and other times.
Yeah.
But a fasting routine that I love for clients now that works for many people is not fasting through the day. Okay. So, like,
Mhm.
get up within an hour of eating, you're having breakfast, and maybe you finish your eating at 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. And then you're fasting through the evening. And that is very hard for us who emotionally eat, who use food to feel better in the evenings. Cause I know that for myself, that's a hard time, especially when I'm by myself. And, next thing I know, I'm eating. And so there's a lot of emotional work usually tied up with that. So not
Right.
only are you working through improving your intermittent fasting, but you're also having to work through some emotional things. But I would say that like most women who have had issues with fasting either are fasting too often, are not fasting at the right time of the day, or fasting is just not good for them at that time, or maybe even fasting is not aligned with their cycle.
Right.
So like maybe in the case of this woman, I would guess that she was fasting every day. And by like the third week of fasting every day, she's like, I am falling asleep. And it's like, well, yeah, you're literally starving to death and your
Mhm.
brain is running on literally nothing. And yes, your brain can run on ketones, but if you are just chronically under eating, there's going to be
Right.
a problem there.
Yep. Totally.
There's going to be
Yeah.
an issue.
Exactly. And so this is why I think it's really, really important to be working with somebody who can understand the nuances in these kind of situations to be able to help you to identify if that's something that's working for you. So, for example, if you're, 35, 38, we'll just say somewhere around there, and you do one of these things, keto intermittent fasting, and you stop sleeping, not a good
Mm,
sign. Not a good sign. That is not a sign to keep pushing through and lowering your calories. That is a sign that you need more food. Your cortisol is dysregulated, which means your blood sugar is automatically going to be dysregulated. And then
mhm,
anything that you're trying to gain from doing keto or intermittent fasting is lost because you're in this perpetual stress cycle. So,
mhm.
when we're talking about like a woman's menstrual cycle, I think that's what you were referring to. Are there specific times where that might be beneficial throughout the cycle for either one of those?
Yes, 100%. Um, okay, so first we need to understand that day one is the day one of your bleed. Okay, so
Yeah.
day one equals the day you bleed.
Mhm.
Usually from day 1 to 10-ish is a time where if you're gonna fast, that's kind of like the magic time to do it.
Okay.
Now, sometimes after ovulation, there's a couple of days like day 16, 17, 18, somewhere around there that there could be a time for some ladies to fast, maybe. But other than that, in the cycle, you need to be eating every day, full meals. So if you want to play around with fasting, my recommendation to you would be wait until you bleed. And you might even find, like, I noticed myself, in fact, this cycle, come day 2, I was just like not hungry.
Mhm.
And my sleep was really, really good. And so I had my pre-workout, I ate all my food, and then I finished at 4 p.m. I think I was like on day 2 or 3 of my cycle. And then I had a really good sleep. I use my little Aura ring. It tells me that I had a good sleep. And so I think on day like 7 or so, I did it again and I had a really good sleep. But come day 10, I was hungry. I was really, really hungry in the evening. I'm like, okay, well, that's it for the playing around with a little bit of intermittent fasting this cycle.
Mhm.
And so, really, that magic time for women who are still having a cycle is, I would say, day 1 to 10, where it's okay to play around with fasting, generally speaking. Okay, generally speaking, if you have like crazy high cortisol and just issues, and it just, you've tried it and it doesn't work, then it's not for you. And just put it in
Mhm.
the toolkit for later. It doesn't mean that you're not going to use it in the future, just not now. And I would say that that's usually the only time where it's beneficial, because glucose is needed to even make progesterone. And so when it comes to the latter part of your cycle, when you really need that progesterone, and if we're stressed out already, our progesterone is going to be lower. And then we try the
Right.
ketogenic diet and we're like eating keto and fasting all throughout the last part of our cycle. We're going to miss cycles. Our sleep's going to tank. We're going to feel terrible. We're going to be grumpy. We're going to be falling asleep in the afternoon.
Yep.
It's because your body needs the glucose. That's the time. That is
Right.
the time that you need the glucose. And the only way to get the glucose, yes, you can argue with me, gluconeogenesis and the body, blah, blah, blah. Okay. No, you need like you need an orange, you need a
Yeah.
potato, you need
Yeah.
to like have a balanced meal. And that's
Right.
just, I think there are going to be women that just are able to get away with some of these things, and that's fine. But most of the time, most of my clients that I'm working with cannot,
Yep. My same
can't.
here. No, and it's okay that you can't. So if you're listening and you're like,
Yes.
That's me," and you feel like you failed the keto
No,
game, so did I. Woo! Okay, no, we didn't fail, we graduated it
no.
because we learned something else about what was going on in my body that was really valuable information. It's really valuable information. And so, especially if you tend to be PMSy, where you have a really low mood, or you tend towards anxiety before your cycle or insomnia, carbs and protein, you need them to build up your progesterone and your
And
glucose.
testosterone and estrogen are the two hormones that require certain foods to properly detoxify out of the body. So if you're fasting cycle day 25, 27, 28, in times where you need these stimulatory foods to detox the estrogen and testosterone, and you're not providing the food, you're probably going to have a worse cycle. You're probably going to have more symptoms. Like, these hormones require food to detoxify. And so that's
Right.
why eating and the fasting rather, and even the ketogenic diet and those latter parts of your cycle past ovulation probably isn't a good time. So you don't have to think of yourself as like failing the ketogenic diet or moving on from the ketogenic diet or failing fasting. It's like, maybe next time try fasting on cycle day 3.
Yep.
And maybe instead of doing a 12-hour fast, you do a 14-hour fast. And you're like, hey, that went pretty well. Okay, maybe cycle day 7, I'm going to try 16 hours. And then you're done for that cycle. And you're like,
Right.
okay, that was good feedback. I feel like I did pretty good. Next time I'm going to do 18 hours on day 3. And so I think your fun time can be days 1 to 10, where you're just kind of playing around with it. And maybe after ovulation, but don't feel like you've failed it. It's just your body is giving you feedback that you're a woman and you need different
Right.
things, and it's
Right.
okay. It's okay.
Absolutely, yes, and you can't do keto like a man because 'cause you're not a man. Like, that's just
Yeah.
plain and simple, like, it just is, and it's not gonna look anything like that because our hormones are so much more complex, and also, the symptoms we have of chronic stress and inflammation and toxicity, they're gonna show themselves very clearly,
Mhm.
that that's not the right path. So, typically for me, when I'm working with somebody, especially if their goal is like, I really want to lose this perimenopausal weight that I've gained. Or, okay, well, 99% of the time, it really is about fine tuning the habits that got us here, like mismanaged stress, like 99% of the time, I would say. And then there's toxicity and infections kind of like layered in within that. Would you say that, I'm curious what your perspective is on that in your practice?
Yeah, I think think it would definitely have to do with habits for sure. I do see a lot of chronic infection issues playing a role, which I think also affects the habits. Like, for example, if you have a parasite and in the evenings, because your neurotransmitters are shifting, you feel more moody, which then causes you to eat more. It's going to cause you to gain weight. And ultimately, the habit of eating when you're not hungry or eating when you're in an emotional state is the problem. But the infection underneath it is causing you to make those certain decisions.
Yeah.
So sometimes we're against all of that. And it's kind of like a soup. Like oftentimes I explain to my clients, it's like we're sitting on the floor and we have 18 balls of yarn that have been tossed around multiple times. And we're just sitting on the floor, undoing each little knot at a time, pulling this yarn to this side and this yarn to this side, and like
Yes,
slowly
right.
but meticulously just
Pulling
pulling
it
our
apart.
way through these things. And so I don't know if I would go as far as saying like, if we could fix all of the habits, most things would be resolved, only because when I started in nutrition, I studied nutrition and I thought that if we could just get a handle on food, 99% of the problems would be solved. And then years later, I was diagnosed with a parasite that nearly killed me. And I was like, huh,
Maybe
yeah,
it's
no,
not
food
the food.
didn't that was not part of it. And so I think there are individuals
Yes.
that there's other things going on, but to kind of backstep is like, if you are emotionally eating, if you're not eating enough, if you're letting your environment dictate your food choices, if you're eating unconsciously, like I can get into the habit because I'm at home by myself a lot eating, where I'll like turn on Netflix and I'm like eating and watching my show. And
Hmm.
it's like this Pavlovian dog situation where like
Hmm.
if there's a plate of food, I have to have the television playing.
Yeah.
And that's when my digestion gets the worst.
Hmm.
Like that is when, and that's an easy habit to switch, of just like
Easy.
being aware of it. And I eat in silence, or maybe I'll turn on some music and I'm more present and I'm chewing more. And that's like a habit that actually makes a lasting change. If there are simple things that we can do to improve our environment, 1 billion%, it's going to shift things. But if you're in the camp of like, I swear to you, I don't know what else is going on, I don't know what
Yeah.
I could change, then
Yeah.
like, don't feel
Right.
crazy, because I've
No.
been there.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because that is absolutely true. Nothing is more frustrating as a patient, client, whatever, to feel like I don't know like why I can't get out of this habit, right? Or like
Yeah.
why am I craving sweet things? Candida, parasites. Like there are H. pylori. Like why am I having trouble digesting fats and proteins, and why can I never get, if we're talking about like stomach acid, if you're having a trouble keeping your stomach acid up and H. pylori isn't showing up on any of your testing, there are reasons for that, which I feel like we could probably do a whole episode on H. pylori all by itself
Oh, I hate
and
H.
why it doesn't
pylori.
show up on testing. However, like you said, what it creates is like you're eating comfort food to soothe your nausea, and you're more likely to lean toward carbs because they're easier to digest, which
Yeah.
then, because your stomach doesn't feel good, and then your lower digestion is impacted, which then can lead to things like SIBO. And then you're craving, then you're having other food cravings, and then you're having all these other digestive issues. And so, absolutely 100%, it's not just about the habits, but it's more what I was, I think, trying to say within that is the habits that got us to this place. So like even like recognizing that like, oh, I'm really eating a lot of comfort foods, but I'm not
Mm,
emotionally distressed. So why is my
mm,
body craving comfort foods? Okay, well, let's look into that. There's probably a metabolic reason for that, right? So like in that case of H. pylori, where you are, you're nauseous, like low
mhm.
level nausea that maybe you've never paid attention to, and it's masking all of these other symptoms, right? So there are these other things that we have to look into with that. Now, I
Yes.
did want to touch on, just because I had a couple people ask about keto and intermittent fasting, if you have SIBO, which of course, if you have SIBO, you probably have adrenal issues and blood sugar dysregulation and stuff, all of that tied into it.
All of the
So,
stuff. The soup.
so, right, I know, I'm like, just put that in the category of stuff, like all the things
Yeah.
that go with that, not minimizing it at all. It's a lot to untangle, like you said about the yarn. So with somebody that's maybe like they know they have SIBO and they're somewhere in the treatment process within that, and they're really frustrated because the weight isn't budging because of the inflammation in the SIBO, is keto something that you would start with in that situation?
I mean, keto is pretty much a SIBO friendly diet, really. Like, other than some of the vegetables that we rely on a lot, like in keto, asparagus is our best friend, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, those sorts of things like
Yeah.
leeks, garlic, fennel, um, artichokes. That's like a big
Hmm.
thing. And so a lot of those will cause SIBO issues. But when it comes, okay, so I have a mixed approach to SIBO. I have worked with a ton of clients on Candida and SIBO. And generally speaking, I find like a period of time where we remove those certain foods is helpful. But I think the chronic removal of these foods to keep SIBO at bay tells me that there's probably a mold issue that needs to
Mm.
be addressed. And so I think that even if it is a mold issue, doing somewhat of a ketogenic-ish type of diet and removing some of the SIBO foods that are causing the issue can be helpful. But like asking yourself, if this is not resolving quickly, what's at the root cause? And
Yeah.
I often find if other things are not working, usually it's mold. And then usually it's also candida with that. And so I think that because the ketogenic diet, generally speaking, is pretty SIBO friendly, because it's going to remove like beans and a lot of like high sugar foods. You do need to be careful with the nuts and seeds. Um, but really, if you're just eating the safe vegetables and meats, you really can't go wrong. But
Mm.
I would say to rely on diet interventions for some of these chronic infections, I
Yes.
haven't found them to be overly helpful at all.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
because you should be able to eat an artichoke. Like,
Yes.
and if you are avoiding artichokes for the rest of your life because it causes your SIBO to flare, there's a problem. This is a
Yes.
chronic issue. There's something else going on.
Yeah, and that I would say the exact same thing, with
Yeah.
that, is just that it wouldn't be my first choice, especially if somebody was, saying like, I'm desperate to lose the weight, and that's the motivator. That can't be the motivator because
No,
we have to, and it's the hardest thing. It is the
I
hardest thing
know.
to work through because it's our weight. It's emotional too. It's how we feel in our
Yeah.
bodies. It's how we feel in the world. It's how we feel in our relationships. Like it's so much more complex than just a pant size, right? Like we all know that. However, actually just had a conversation with a client about this week, that she was like, we've made all of this progress. Like you can see on her tracking,
Mm,
like 95% symptom improvement, right? And she's like, but the weight just won't budge. And I'm feeling really frustrated with that. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, we're not going to lose weight if we're not sleeping. You're sleeping now, which is
yeah.
fantastic, right? You're not going to lose weight if you're not digesting your food. You're digesting your food now. So like, yay, we're 5 steps forward, right? And so I just asked her the question. I was like, what does your weight mean to you? Like what is the
Mm,
value that is assigned to losing weight? Because if you have like healthy cholesterol, your blood levels all look good, like your blood chemistry looks good, you're able to move your body, you sleep well at night, but maybe you're a pant size bigger, then we got to start looking at like what is our motivation for the weight loss, right? And that's like that is the harder
it's
question.
so
And so
hard.
we had a really good dialogue about, she was able to say like, oh, it's not really about the weight, it's the fact that there's this other thing going on in my marriage that's impacting how I feel about myself. Was like, that's
Mm,
not gonna be solved by losing 10 pounds. Like, and we
nope.
just had to have this very honest which I think is true for all of us in that situation. What is my motivation, right? Because otherwise we can end up compromising our health in order to, which you've walked that road, I've walked that road,
Ugh.
every other woman I've worked with has walked that road, where we compromise our health in order to achieve this unachievable goal, and it ends up harming us at some point. So,
It really comes down, I think, at least for me and many of the clients that I've talked with, is like, I'm never satisfied. Like, that is a true problem within me that I am dissatisfied. Like, I can look at a picture of myself from a month ago and be like, oh, if I could just get back to that. Like,
mhm,
that's messed up. Like, and we're
sure,
just so dissatisfied because I know I've gotten, I lost a good amount of weight last year, working out more and changing up my macros. And that was like such a fun thing to kind of go through with no expectations. And I then decided a couple of months ago that I wanted to gain some muscle mass, and I've seen the scale go up, and just kind of like thinking through this, like getting on the scale and seeing the number go up and being like, okay, like this was my goal. I am choosing to gain this weight. But somehow in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, I'm kind of panicking. Like, what does this mean? How am I going to feel? And we all have to work through those things. But I can
Mhm.
say, no matter where we go with the number on the scale or how we look or whatever, it's never enough. And
Mhm.
that is the thing that I've been pressing into recently, is like, we need to be satisfied with what we have right now. And that satisfaction cannot come from the number on the scale, from how we're feeling with our bodies, because it will never be enough. It will never
Yep.
be enough,
Right.
ever. And it will never fix the problems.
No, and I think it speaks to much more of like a cultural issue with how we've talked about like not us in personal, not us specifically, but how as a culture we've made weight something that it's not, right? Or where
Yeah.
like weight loss equals health, or being X amount of pounds, or this BMI equals health, when really no, like we need to be
No.
measuring your sleep, your periods, your digestion, how many infections you have, are you able to clear them? What's your toxic burden like? Like those are the things I actually care about. It's like when I'm talking to
Yeah.
somebody, it tells me so much more than anything else. And so I think we just have a lot of work to do in changing that narrative, which is why I'm having this conversation with you. But
And it's so heartbreaking. Like I can think of a client that I spoke with over the last week, and like, oh my goodness, she's a different person. Like her blood work is incredible. And like you said, she's sleeping, her digestion is great, her skin looks awesome, like her hair is growing. And she's like, this isn't working for me. And I'm like, okay, like, can you tell me
what does that
like
mean?
what's
Yeah.
not working for you? And she's like, I don't feel any different. And this is exactly why every time I meet with clients, before we meet, I give them a huge questionnaire,
Yep.
and they go through symptoms, and it gives a number scale, and
Yep.
I can look at it and be like, when we started, your score was 700 on your score of symptoms. It's now 50. You do
Out.
not feel the same. Like, I'm telling you, you do not feel the
Yeah.
same. And when we work through that, it's like my body feels the same. I am the same weight. I feel the same. And this is just like, why have we done this to her? Like,
I
are you
know.
kidding me?
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And I'm just as guilty of it. Like,
100%.
I have to work through that too. I have to work through it too. Like, I will sacrifice sleep time to go to the gym early. And I'm like, Leanne, what are you doing? You know that if you don't get sleep, you're not going to be rested. You're not going to build the muscle you want to build in the gym. Why are you doing this?
Right.
So it's this reprogramming, but it's
It
like,
is.
it's so unfortunate, because I can tell you, when you're 85 years old, living with a healthier liver and a digestion that still works, with lower cardiovascular risk factors because you changed the way you ate and all those things, that's what's going to matter in that point. Like, I do not want to be 90 years old thinking, should I eat that cookie or not? Or
Right.
like, oh my goodness, but we've done this. It's so
Right.
unfortunate.
It is. 100%. And yeah, I would say with that, it is such a shifting of the mindset that is like a
Yeah.
continual work in progress, right? And I
Continual.
would say I'm pretty like guarded in terms of what I let myself watch, like on social media or movies, when it comes to like what I'm allowing to influence my mind about how I think
Yes.
about weight and health. Just because like I would say that I don't think that I didn't have an eating disorder, but I don't think anybody that grew up in the 90s and early 2000s doesn't have some sort of disordered eating something, right? Mentality at least. So I'm pretty guarded, and I still have to do the work of pushing through those mindsets. Like I've started lifting weights, and I came out of like a big nervous system crash last year because my iron tanked from COVID, and a whole bunch of other stuff
Mm.
happened that I was having to rebuild my health back afterwards. And my cortisol spiked, which then meant my weight just like went up, even though I eat healthier than everybody I know. but like still my weight,
Yeah.
poof. And I'm like, okay, so I got to do the things that I'm teaching, which is working on, having healthy digestion and slowing down when I'm eating my meals and managing my stress and lifting weights and walking. And I'm like, nothing looks different. I look in the mirror, but I had this moment at the beach where I went to lift something like an 80-pound cooler. And I was like, I had zero issues. Like, I lifted it
Yeah.
and I was like, I can walk like 20 feet with this. And I'm like, I'm just gonna feel my bicep right now. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have muscle.
Yeah.
But like
There
it
it
didn't
is.
but you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm still wearing the same size sweatshirt. I don't look
Yeah.
any smaller. And so I still had to do that work of like, know what? I'm gonna actually intentionally take a moment or five and look back at how much I've had to work through in the last year to even get to this place where I don't have nausea every time I eat because I've dealt with the H. pylori and I've dealt with the inflammation and I've dealt with this crazy situation, right? And so that's the work that we're constantly doing with people is like, okay, let's reframe this. Let's look at how
Yes.
far you've come and how well your body's doing. And if I do have to take out, I do the same thing. And we probably use the same platform that allows us to do like the calculations on stuff like that. But it's so fun to look at those numbers and be like, you started out 150 just in the GI section. Like,
Yes.
not anywhere else. Like, we're not even looking at nervous system or periods yet. Like, we're just looking at GI. And you're at 7. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
You
gonna
don't
take a
feel the
minute.
same.
I'm gonna take a minute to do a happy dance. I don't know about you, but that's pretty freaking awesome. So,
Yes.
because yeah, I mean, and we're not even talking about how pooping is so essential for estrogen detox. Like, that makes me excited when you're pooping regularly and you don't have diarrhea and you don't have constipation. 2 thumbs up. Fantastic. We're going to
Yes.
keep moving. So, I know we talked about a lot and we could probably have many, many more side conversations about all of this, but I would just love for you to share, as a practitioner, maybe a couple words of encouragement that you would say to somebody who's considering keto and intermittent fasting and feeling like they're not sure if that's the best route for them because of where their body's at and what they're struggling with. What might you say just for some parting words of encouragement?
You're very intuitive. I think we all are. And I think deep down we often know what's going to work and not. And so if you feel like intuitively the ketogenic diet isn't for you, but you feel pressured, I know that sometimes I'll jump on social media myself or listen to podcasts and I'll be convinced. In fact, in preparation for this call today, I was listening through a couple of my old like fasting audios and just trying to get assessment of like what I thought before and kind of what I'm
Where
thinking
am I
now.
now?
And
Yeah.
I convinced myself that I should start fasting again. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Nope, I know that that's not what I need right now. So like, I think there's just so much noise out there. And so intuitively, if you feel like that's not the best place for you to go, I would say like listen to that and don't force yourself to do something that you feel would put you into a compromising position. As you get to know your body, you're going to know when it's time to push hard and when it's time to back off.
Yeah.
And that comes with time and practice. And sometimes somebody coming alongside you and seeing the bigger picture and being like, this isn't for you right now. Like, my recommendation is for you to not do this. And
Yep.
one of my most favorite questions that a client asks me, and I never push them to ask this question, but it's a natural one of like, what would you do if you were in my position? And it allows me to say, okay, knowing what I know about your body, and we know this because of this and this because of that, given this data, this is what I would do.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be helpful to have that other person beside you, kind of nudging you in certain ways. And it
Totally.
allows you to be more intuitive and also start to connect. And this is why I love labs and understanding kind of what's going on, because you can start to connect how you're feeling with a certain data point. So, for
Yes.
example, wearing a CGM, like if you are wearing a CGM and your glucose is consistently elevated and your doctor has said that your insulin is high, the ketogenic diet might be a good option for you. If you're wearing like an aura tracker and your sleep is really bad one day and you kind of look back and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I totally didn't have a good day yesterday. You can start to learn from that. And so those
Right.
data points can be very, very helpful. But intuitively, if you're feeling like the ketogenic diet might not be the best for you, then there are other means to get some of the benefits that you can off the ketogenic diet without going all in. Like some of the things that we talked about, like bringing in fasting maybe once or twice in a cycle, starting off around day 1 to 10 and doing that twice and just getting a feel for it. I think a
Totally.
big issue that we have is like when we find something, we latch onto it and we want to do it every day, day in, day out, because we found something that works. And when I first started keto, I thought that that's the way that it needed to be, and it doesn't. When I first started fasting, I realized that it didn't need to be like that either. Same with working
Mhm.
out, same with walking. Like there's ebbs and flows of all things. And so maybe you've tried keto in the past and you did it all in like crazy, less than 20 grams of carbs, and you felt like death. Okay. You might want to try 100 grams of carbs and like see how that goes for one day in the month. And like you did okay there.
Right.
Okay, next time. So we can shift as we go. It doesn't need to be this all in thing. It doesn't have to be like tomorrow you decide you're going to be keto and this is going to be the thing that you're going to do forever. And also understand, in my case, and many of my clients, it's like something is going to work for you for a period of time until
Yeah.
either it doesn't work anymore or you don't need it anymore. For
Right.
my own personal experience with keto, I mean, I ate keto for nearly 10 years. Like
Hmm.
it completely transformed my life to the point where I mean, I'm good. And now I'm working out, I'm eating a ton of carbs, and my sleep is really, really great. And my body's able to handle that. And I don't need keto right now. And
Right.
so you're going to go through ebbs and flows where if you find that keto works in the way that it works for you, know that there might come a day where it doesn't work anymore and you just have to shift. And I think the shifting part is hard for us. And so when your
Totally.
body says to shift, don't wait too long because it will get angry and
Right.
we don't
Yeah.
want that.
Learn from us, learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
Don't do what we have done.
Yeah.
This was such a good conversation, Leanne. Thank you for taking the time to share and just have just have a dialogue about it, practitioner to practitioner, but also because, we do have some overlap in who we serve and, client base wise. And I think these are very common questions and concerns and frustrations that women have when they're trying to figure out what is the next step for me. And so I just really appreciate your time and all that you do for the community. So if you're a listener and you have not already followed the Healthful Pursuit podcast or Leanne Vogel on Instagram, make sure to do that. She is a wonderful resource and just a fantastic human. And yeah, thank you, Leanne. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me, Andrea.